being paid with taxpayer dollars to join woke programs around so-called racial justice. School kids are being trained to carry out the political racial agenda through new roles as quote-unquote organizers and community leaders. Those are both loaded terms. I'll explain what those actually mean. Now, first off, from the Free Press, it says, an activist group in California has paid nearly 100 public high schoolers $1,400 each to learn how to fight for racial and social justice, the Free Press has learned. Contracts between Long Beach Unified School District and Californians for Justice from 2019 to 2023, exclusively obtained by the Free Press, show the school district used taxpayer funds to pay the group nearly $2 million to facilitate equity and leadership development trainings for students and for
no wonder
teachers.
California's going broke.
In addition to the student stipends, the contracts also allocated a total of $20,200 to 13 parents for participating in the group's programs. Now, it notes, starting from December 2019 until now, the Long Beach Unified School District south of Los Angeles has paid at least 78 students a total of nearly $100,000 for participating in a club run by the organization also known as CFJ. The most recent contract runs until June of 2024, meaning it's still ongoing, folks. It notes that CFJ boasts on its site to have trained hundreds of youth of color, sounds kind of racist to me, honestly, in Long Beach to be community leaders and organizers. In Long Beach, the group successfully advocated for implementing restorative justice practices across the district's 84 schools. In other words, they're using taxpayer money to push for partisan political agendas, which is frankly probably not legal if it ever goes to court. More.
Leaders of the Select Committee on the CCP told TikTok on Tuesday to stop deceiving users with false information about a bill meant to purge the app of Chinese Communist Party influence. Chairman Mike Gallagher and Ranking Member Raja Krishnamurthy accused TikTok of spreading false claims to manipulate and mobilize Americans on behalf of the Chinese regime.
As outlined in our bipartisan bill, if TikTok is completely divested by CCP-controlled ByteDance, if there is a separation, the app can remain in the United States.
The letter includes a screenshot of TikTok's pop-up with a red Call Now button. The rally call asks users to speak up now before the government strips 170 million people of their constitutional right to free expression. TikTok claims the measure is equivalent to a total ban. The bill would give TikTok's Chinese owner ByteDance about 6 months to divest the short video app. The two lawmakers noted TikTok had solicited location information in its campaign, calling the act a new low. The House is set to vote Wednesday under fast-track rules that require a two-thirds yes vote for the bill to pass. President Biden says he would sign the bill if it passes Congress. That's after a House committee unanimously voted to advance the measure last week. Democratic Representative Debbie Dingell says she and other committee members voted to separate TikTok from the Chinese Communist Party, not to ban it.
We've had classified briefings. I thought long and hard, and quite frankly, what TikTok did on Thursday, flooding my office and other offices with calls of kids who didn't know why they were calling us, shows the kind of control that they have. I want TikTok to continue. I don't want the People's Republic of China controlling the data, the access to the data, and manipulating the data that they are doing. It is a threat to our national security.
House Speaker Mike Johnson calls the bill an important bipartisan measure to take on China, the U.S.'s largest geopolitical foe. The bill will likely need at least 60 senators' approval to make it to Biden's desk. Senators from both sides of the aisle are expressing concern about the CCP's access to data through the app and its ability to push propaganda. Some suggest changes are needed if the bill passes in the House.
You could eliminate TikTok, but they could open it up tomorrow, TokTik, whatever you want to call it, and do the same thing.
Former President Trump told CNBC's Squawk Box on Tuesday he believes TikTok is a threat to national security, but that a ban would impact young people and could benefit Facebook and its influence in elections. Trump moved to ban TikTok and WeChat through an executive order while in office, but courts blocked the action after TikTok sued on grounds that a ban would violate free expression and due process rights. Biden bans TikTok on federal devices for around 4 million employees in 2022. Both the FBI and Federal Communications Commission warned TikTok owner ByteDance can share user data, like browsing history, location, and biometrics with the Chinese regime. Jeremy Sandberg, NTD News.
in America can start a business and enter, the upper class. You have opportunity in America, and if you work hard, you're not locked into one social class as people were in, revolutionary Europe. America doesn't have this kind of issue for the most part, and so when communists wanted to bring communist revolution here, they had to come up with another method. And so rather than say the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, right, the poor and the rich essentially, they divided us by race, by gender, by, sexual orientation, or whatever the heck they want to do now, and so on. They came up with a concept called critical theory. And critical theory was the taking of the bourgeois-proletariat dichotomy and extending it to every single division of people. Men and women, black and white, rich and poor, human and animal, whatever they want to make it these days. All the different systems of quote-unquote, critical race theory, critical gender theory, critical so-on theory. That is all based in that concept, the basic understanding that they cannot divide Americans using the classical Marxist agenda. And this goes back to what we're seeing happening in this country with race politics. We should be calling this critical race theory and a Marxist revolutionary agenda being used to divide Americans with the intent of bringing about change in our government. If you want to understand what real insurrection looks like, then look no further. Race politics used as a tool to push for changing a form of government, to usher in a communist state. That is the agenda of this. Now look, back to this organization in question, it's unclear, just to be clear, it's unclear whether this particular program ties in with, Maoism or critical race theory, but, of course, I think it's a very valid concern, and as taxpayers, with our taxpayer money going to finance the indoctrination of kids into a radical movement, it does seem like something we should be paying attention to. Now, look, that's...
Banned my personal account on which I was campaigning for Congress, raising money, and using my free speech to inform the voters in my district they can vote for me. This was not by a company owned by China. This was by American-owned Twitter. This came on the heels of our own United States government working with big tech and working with social media companies to censor and ban Americans' free speech. I believe that this bill can cause future problems. It's opening Pandora's box, and I'm opposed to this bill. Most Americans don't trust the United States government because of our experience dealing with it. Never forget that the United States government also was the one that provided the Russia hoax to Americans.
TikTok
it also
suspended me.
Worked to ban Americans' free speech. It also has worked in so many ways to illegally, warrantless spy on Americans through FISA. If we wanted to be serious about stopping a foreign adversary, if we wanted to be serious about stopping China, we would stop China from buying our U.S. farmland. We would raise up our American energy independence. We would also stop the Green New Deal and not rely on China, who owns and operates 85% of the battery market worldwide. There are dangers that lie ahead in this. This is really about controlling Americans' data. And if we cared about Americans' data, then we would stop the sale of Americans' data universally, not just with China. There's some further issues. This is a Pandora's box. What's to stop Congress or the United States government in the future from forcing the sale of another social media company, claiming that it's protecting Americans' data from foreign adversaries? I think we could see in the future another Russia, and possibly force the sale of X, as many members in this body claim that Elon Musk is altering the algorithms of X. By the way, it was Elon Musk's purchase of X that restored my social media account on Twitter and allowed me to have my free speech back on Twitter. There's also members of this body, the Democrats are claiming that election meddling can happen on social media.
Everything else, because these radical groups function like that. They, again, back to Saul Alinsky, they try to isolate an individual and just attack that individual relentlessly. They make the political personal, meaning they don't actually go after the real debates. They don't debate the main topic. Instead, they find the individual who's pushing the opposing debate, and they label that individual as racist, sexist, bigoted, and so on, try to cancel them and make an example out of them, destroy them as much as they can, and then make it so that people see that and say, I don't want that happening to me. I'm going to keep my mouth shut. Now look, even the whole woke system around sex ed, trans policies, and so on, all of it ties into this. These programs are filling these kids' heads with propaganda, convincing them in some cases that their parents are the enemy and that the school propagandists, these brainwashers, are their allies. And then they use this broader system to get the kids politically active to push for their sick political agendas. And they're turning the kids into political pawns, little activists, little red guards for the far left policies that they're trying to advance. And the recent news about kids actually getting paid cash in some similar programs, well, look, that fits very well into this picture.
Banned my personal account on which I was campaigning for Congress, raising money, and using my free speech to inform the voters in my district they can vote for me. This was not by a company owned by China. This was by American-owned Twitter. This came on the heels of our own United States government working with big tech and working with social media companies to censor and ban Americans' free speech. I believe that this bill can cause future problems. It's opening Pandora's box, and I'm opposed to this bill. Most Americans don't trust the United States government because of our experience dealing with it. Never forget that the United States government also was the one that provided the Russia hoax to Americans.
TikTok
it also
suspended me.
Worked to ban Americans' free speech. It also has worked in so many ways to illegally, warrantless spy on Americans through FISA. If we wanted to be serious about stopping a foreign adversary, if we wanted to be serious about stopping China, we would stop China from buying our U.S. farmland. We would raise up our American energy independence. We would also stop the Green New Deal and not rely on China, who owns and operates 85% of the battery market worldwide. There are dangers that lie ahead in this. This is really about controlling Americans' data. And if we cared about Americans' data, then we would stop the sale of Americans' data universally, not just with China. There's some further issues. This is a Pandora's box. What's to stop Congress or the United States government in the future from forcing the sale of another social media company, claiming that it's protecting Americans' data from foreign adversaries? I think we could see in the future another Russia, and possibly force the sale of X, as many members in this body claim that Elon Musk is altering the algorithms of X. By the way, it was Elon Musk's purchase of X that restored my social media account on Twitter and allowed me to have my free speech back on Twitter. There's also members of this body, the Democrats, are claiming that election meddling can happen on social media.
And a lot of that can be tied to one individual. What's happening on the streets of American cities, folks? Light on crime policies, revolving doors for criminals, gangs becoming more brazen, as we talked about yesterday, selling fake IDs on the streets of New York to illegal aliens, and operating, notably without fear of punishment in many instances. A lot of this is taking place thanks to woke district attorneys being backed by billionaire George Soros. George Soros, you might remember, admitted to this. He talked about it in an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal a while back. It's part of an agenda for so-called racial justice, back to that narrative they're teaching kids at schools. He did this, notably, by pouring millions of dollars into the campaign of people who would enact his agenda by changing the way that laws are enforced based on an agenda around race. If you're black, you might get lighter sentences. If you're white, you might get harsher ones, right? Now, look, normally, though, back on the point of how he backed the campaigns of these woke individuals, normally there are limits on how much money you can donate to a political campaign. People go to prison for it. You might remember Dinesh D'Souza, the documentary filmmaker, was thrown in prison under Barack Obama for just going a little bit over the campaign finance donations to one candidate. George Soros, though, has donated massive amounts, millions, and he's found a way to get around these campaign finance laws through some loopholes in our system. The New York Post says this: for the last several years, billionaire philanthropist George Soros has been quietly financing a revolution in criminal justice reform, doling out tens of millions of dollars to progressive candidates in district attorneys' races throughout the country amid movements to abolish bail and defund the police. Working with an activist
over in Fulton County, Georgia, Trump's RICO case has taken, you can say, a bit of a back seat to the allegations that were lobbied against Ms. Fani Willis, the Fulton County District Attorney. The allegations came out in a court filing about 2 or so months ago, alleging that Ms. Fani Willis was having an affair with the special prosecutor she assigned to the case and benefiting financially from the case against Trump. The basic gist is that Ms. Fani Willis assigned the man who she was having an affair with to be the lead prosecutor in the case. Her office then paid him upwards of $600,000 or $700,000 before he then turned around and took her on lavish vacations around the world to places like Napa Valley, the Caribbean, Texas, Florida, and so on. That's the general outline of the allegation. And over the past several weeks, there were multiple days of in-person testimony wherein both Ms. Fani Willis as well as Mr. Nathan Wade, they tried to explain away this whole affair. And one of the cruxes of their argument is that they claim that their personal relationship began in the year 2022, which is significant because it would mean that they only started to see each other after Mr. Nathan Wade was assigned to be the lead prosecutor in the Trump case. Here's a timeline. Mr. Nathan Wade was assigned to be special counsel on the Trump case in November of 2021. And the claim made by Ms. Fani Willis and Mr. Nathan Wade is that before this assignment, they were just friends and only became romantically involved afterwards in the year 2022. Now, obviously, that's still not great, but it's the story that they've stuck to. Under oath, both Mr. Nathan Wade and Ms. Fani Willis repeatedly told the court that their personal relationship only began in the year 2022, after he was assigned to be the special prosecutor. However, during the actual course of the hearings, there were several witnesses who claimed otherwise, who claimed that the relationship actually began much earlier. For instance, there was a former employee of the district attorney's office who testified that the relationship actually began in the year 2019. There was also a former lawyer from Mr. Nathan Wade's law firm whose text messages likewise claimed that the alleged relationship began in the year 2019. But in this type of a scenario, it's just essentially their word against Ms. Fani Willis's. One side says that the relationship began in 2019. The other side says that it began in the year 2022. Who do you believe? Well, it's exactly amidst this backdrop that lawyers for President Trump dropped this new court filing right here. You can see it up on screen for yourself. Trump's lawyers were able to subpoena AT&T, and by doing so, they were able to get Mr. Nathan Wade's cell phone records from January 1st of 2021 up until November 30th of 2021, right when Mr. Nathan Wade was assigned to be the special counsel, meaning that these phone records, they cover the 11-month period leading up.
51 years old, mainly funnels cash through a complicated web of federal and state political action committees, as well as nonprofits from coast to coast. Public records show. And notes that last year, the Foundation to Promote Open Society, a nonprofit in Soros's orbit, there are many of them, gave $3 million to the Community Resource Hub for Safety and Accountability, according to a recent report. The group provides resources to local advocates and organizations working to address the harm of policing in the U.S. Further in it states, the goal of the myriad PACs is forced on electing progressives to end tough policing and mass incarceration. Meaning, of course, they want to make it so police can't do their jobs and criminals are let out of jail. Further in it notes that between 2015 and 2019, Soros and his affiliated political action committees spent more than $17 million in local DA races, district's attorney, in support of left-wing candidates, according to the Capital Research Center, a nonprofit that tracks lobbying and charitable giving. That number, notably, is expected to top $20 million in the last 2 years, according to estimates from the NLPC. Now, look, more on the issue of so-called racial justice. It's being revealed that much of this itself is actually racist.
Wade to be the special prosecutor. It's also, again, that same period of time where, under oath, Nathan Wade and Fani Willis claimed that they were not seeing each other. They were just friends. However, these phone records, as well as the geolocation data that were tied to these phone records, they paint a much different picture. Here are some of the top-line findings. Quote, Nathan Wade and Fani Willis exchanged over 2,000 voice calls and just under 12,000 text messages from January 1st of 2021 through November 30th of 2021. Geolocation data indicates that Nathan Wade was at Fani Willis's condo on at least 35 occasions. The data revealed he was stationary at the condo and not in transit. Nathan Wade's visits to Fani Willis's condo were corroborated by text and phone calls. Then the report lists some concrete examples. For instance, quote, on November 29th of 2021, following a call from Ms. Willis at 11:32 p.m., while the call continued, Nathan Wade's phone left the East Cobb area just after midnight and arrived within the geofence located on the Dogwood address, which is Ms. Fani Willis's condo, at 12:43 a.m. on November 30th of 2021. The phone remained there until 4:55 a.m. Then, in another similar example, quote, on September 11th of 2021, Nathan Wade arrived at the condo address at approximately 10:45 p.m. He left the address at 3:28 a.m. and arrived at his own home at 4:05 a.m. He then texted Fani Willis at 4:20 a.m. Now, because of the time constraints in this particular case, and the fact that there was literally an entire year's worth of data to comb through, well, the lawyers for Trump were only able to go through a part of it. But even that small part they were able to cover, it showed roughly 35 trips that Mr. Nathan Wade made to Fani Willis's condo, many of them being late at night. And so what appears to have been happening, at least according to this data, is that these two individuals were having their affair throughout at least 2021. At the tail end of 2021, Ms. Fani Willis assigned Nathan Wade to be the special prosecutor in the Trump case. Her office then subsequently paid him upwards of $700,000, and then he turned around and took her on lavish vacations around the whole world. Now, of course, they claim that she paid him back in cash for those trips, but they have no receipts to prove it. Regardless, though, once they were caught, they told the court, under oath, that their relationship only started in the year 2022, after this assignment was made. However, the only problem with that story is that this cell phone data appears to show otherwise. In 2021, leading up to the assignment, Nathan Wade and Fani Willis, they exchanged 12,000 text messages, 2,000 phone calls, and dozens of personal, physical late-night visits. I guess we can make up our own minds as to what was likely happening behind the scenes. Now, because admitting this type of evidence into the official record would essentially show that Ms. Fani Willis lied to the court, well, it appears that she is fighting tooth and nail to have the evidence be inadmissible. Although it's worth mentioning that she says she's only doing it for technical and procedural reasons. Here's part of what Ms. Fani Willis wrote to the court regarding why they should just ignore this cell phone ping data. Quote, the cell phone data fails to prove anything relevant and should be tossed because it contains both telephone records that have not been admitted into evidence and an affidavit and other documents containing unqualified opinion evidence. Because of this, the court should exclude the new information or at least consider rebuttal evidence that demonstrates the unreliability of the unqualified opinion evidence improperly introduced by defendant Trump. The records do nothing more than demonstrate that Special Prosecutor Wade's telephone was located somewhere within a densely populated, multi-mile radius where various residences, restaurants, bars, nightclubs, and other businesses are located. Although it is really worth mentioning that despite how Ms. Fani Willis is trying to paint this cell phone tracking data as being imprecise, in reality, police departments across the country use this exact same technique to pinpoint suspects all the time. It's a very common technique which can locate people typically within a few dozen feet. In fact, many people who were at the Capitol on January the 6th were actually tracked down using this exact same method. Regardless, though, that was her defense. Although, what is perhaps most interesting is that just earlier today, ahead of closing arguments in this particular case, while the judge overseeing the whole thing indicated that he's pretty much heard enough, and he doesn't even necessarily need to go through the phone records to make his final determination. Take a listen.
All right, and then...
Ironically, some of it may not even be legal. I want to get into that in a minute, but briefly on George Soros. You know, again, normally, folks, there are limits on the amount of money you can give to a political campaign. You can't donate, normally, millions of dollars to a campaign. But the loophole in that is this. Well, what does that money go to? If you donate them, let's say, hypothetically speaking, you donate the max amount of money to a political campaign, usually in the range of like, $500 or $1,600, depending on the type of race, right? The cap that one individual can donate is typically not that high. Well, what happens? The race then has to use it for a few things. They hire staffers, they pay for their offices, they buy materials like, for example, pamphlets, they do advertising spots on TV and newspapers and so on, right? Normally, in other words, you have the money used from campaign finance donations being funneled into the things that promote the campaign. And so what have these radicals done? Rather than give the money to that legal system whereby you back a campaign and help them promote themselves, they found a loophole, which is you can hire a third-party organization that does that work for them. You can hire a radical justice organization, for example, which can run its own commercials, which can, for example, go out and campaign for the individual so that the campaign itself does not have to pay for the campaigners. They can, for example, print materials on behalf of the candidate in order to push their campaign. They can do all the things that normal campaign finance funds would be used for, but without going through the limits on the campaign finance system. Because if you did that, you go to prison. It's illegal. Now, this loop...
Both parties, since the close of the evidence on the 16th, had followed up. Now I think both sides have made requests to reopen the evidence. On behalf of the defense, there were some issues with cell phone records, and the state has found an additional witness that they would like to present. And the instruction I provided on Tuesday was that for today, I think we've reached the point where I'd like to hear more of how some of the legal arguments apply to what has already been presented. And it may already be possible for me to make a decision without those needing to be material to that decision. So that's why we're here today. I wanted to make sure we held this time because it is a bit of a logistical challenge to get everyone in a room together.
And so there you have it. The final verdict regarding whether or not Ms. Fani Willis will ultimately be kicked off the case should be coming in within the next week or two. So we can look forward to that. Although, to be frank with you, my biggest takeaway from this new court filing regarding this cell phone data is just a sudden realization of how closely we're being tracked. I mean, I've heard many cybersecurity experts say that we're just carrying around essentially a tracking device in our pockets all the time. But it's really wild to see a case like this where a lawyer can just subpoena the phone company and they turn over not only your text message and your call logs, but they even hand over your physical location data going back 3 years. And this is not even a murder case or something like that. I mean, of course, this case is important to the nation, but there is something really unsettling about knowing that all it takes is a simple subpoena from the other side, and then your physical location data can just be handed over. I mean, I've known for a long time that it is being tracked via the phone, but I just assumed that it was being wiped every few months, like a surveillance camera that needs to delete the old files to record the new ones. I had no idea that people could get access to literally years' worth of my minute travel history. That is, at least to me, the most unsettling aspect of this whole case. But that's just me. I'd love to know your thoughts. Do you think that this new cell phone data proves that Ms. Fani Willis and Mr. Nathan Wade were lying to the court? And if not, what do you think that they were doing late at night 35 times over in that condo? And also, how do you feel about knowing that at any time, your cell phone company can turn over your location data and reveal where you've been traveling to over the past several years? And then until next time, I'm your host, Roman from the Epoch Times. Stay informed. Most important, stay free.
Like George Soros can donate incredible amounts of money to a campaign and push them into office in some instances. Get people who would normally probably not win and make them the leading candidates. This loophole within our campaign finance system, it is what is allowing this to take place. Now, more on the issue, though, back to, again, racial justice. As I was mentioning, you know, in my opinion, if you're going to discriminate based on race or national origin, and if you believe that some people deserve to be, you know, treated better and some worse just based on the color of their skin, I would say you're racist. And based on that, I would say that the entire narrative of racial justice, which wants to give preferential treatment or worse treatment depending on a person's race, I think it's racist. And of course, you have this argument happening even in schools and even in crime. Because you have instances where if a white individual were to, for example, attack a black individual, it's a hate crime. If the tables are turned, you very rarely see that. Justice is meted out on a racial basis in many parts of the U.S. This is already the case. And of course, even race-based hiring practices are an issue. Even race-based school programs are an issue, and other things. In other words, racism, ironically, has crept back into the lifeblood of America through the anti-racist movement. The anti-racists are the new racists. And what's interesting right now is that, ironically, a lot of this may not be legal. The things that these radical activists are doing may actually violate American law. Let me show you this. AP has it. Just one of many stories. A federal judge in Texas has ordered a 55-year-old U.S. agency that caters to minority-owned businesses to serve people regardless of race, siding with white business owners who claim the program discriminated against them. In other words, this, woke, we serve people based on race business was discriminating against white business owners. It says that the ruling was a significant victory for conservative activists waging a far-ranging legal battle against race-conscious workplace programs. Keep in mind, folks, this is AP, which has a very far-left agenda just in general, right? They, of course, try to frame that individuals who try to hire based on race or other things are the ones fighting for race consciousness, and individuals actually fighting against real racism are waging a legal battle, right? A far-ranging legal battle against it. It notes that this is bolstered by the Supreme Court's ruling last June dismantling affirmative action programs in higher education. Of course, affirmative action being the idea that individuals based on race should also get to cut the line, so to speak, when it comes to hiring practices or when it comes to, for example, college admission programs, whereby if an individual is black, they might get in, and if they're white, they might not, based solely on their race, not on their merits. Now, further in, it notes that advocates for minority-owned businesses slammed the ruling as a serious blow to efforts to level the playing field for black, Hispanic, and other minority business owners who face barriers in accessing financing and other resources. Absolute nonsense, in my opinion. That is actually racist. Now, it notes further in as well that Judge Mark T. Pittman of the U.S. District Court of the Northern District of Texas, who was appointed by former President Donald Trump, ruled that the Minority Business Development Agency's eligibility parameters violate the Fifth Amendment's equal protection guarantees because they presume that racial minorities are inherently disadvantaged, which I would agree with, actually. It's not the
property and data. And this hearing today drew particular attention because the House of Representatives is set to vote on a bill that could potentially ban TikTok in the U.S. It was also a very interesting hearing because we could see how bipartisan the concern for Chinese Communist Party's influence through social media platforms in U.S. territories. Let's hear what Senator Mark Warner, the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, had to say about the threat coming from TikTok.
Rare for me to say that Donald Trump was right, but Donald Trump was right years ago when he pointed out the enormous national security concerns around TikTok.
So there we saw, it was very interesting to see
a Democrat saying that?
The chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee admitting that President Trump was right 4 years ago when he signaled the threat coming from TikTok. Today, Federal Communications Commissioner Brendan Carr spoke to the Epoch Times in their program American Thought Leaders, and he perfectly explained, Mr. Carr, the Federal Communications Commissioner, perfectly explained how the Chinese Communist Party uses its social media platforms to stretch its influence. Let's listen to Commissioner Brendan Carr.
Of a certain race, if you're not white, it doesn't mean that you're automatically poor. And if you're white, it doesn't automatically mean that you're rich. I know plenty of white people who don't have a lot of money. I know plenty of minorities who are very wealthy. It's a just total nonsense narrative. The bigger issue, though, is back to, again, what they noted in the Constitution. You have the Equal Protections Act. One of the things made to make racism not enforceable through government. One of the reasons we have that in our Constitution is to make sure that the government does not give people preferential treatment or abuse people based on the color of their skin or based on their racial origins.
Well, colleagues want to ignore this fact. We have legislation before us that is 12...
From Texas is recognized for a minute and a half.
I thank the Speaker. We are in a Cold War with China, and some of my colleagues want to ignore this fact. We have legislation before us that is 12 pages long. The bill is not a ban. It forces foreign adversaries, including Chinese communists, to divest. The bill is not a bill of attainder. It's prospective, not retrospective. The bill does not violate the First Amendment. It focuses on conduct, not content. It requires both being controlled by a foreign adversary and conduct that itself is espionage. If you just have one alone, it might be debatable, as the gentleman from North Carolina or Senator Paul notes, in that it might protect Americans' rights to seek out and obtain foreign propaganda. But again, that is not this case, because we have, and have as a trigger in the bill, demonstrated national security conduct harm. To be clear, we've properly taken action at the device layer by banning Huawei and ZTE spy gear. We've taken action at the carrier level, prohibiting China Mobile and China Telecom from connecting to our networks based on a determination they are controlled by the CCP and a national security threat. We now need to take action at the application level when malign CCP control has been demonstrated, lest we render meaningless our past actions to protect the United States of America. We should ban Chi-Com ownership of our farmland or drug manufacturing, but we should fight them here and ban the foreign ownership and control of American data and stop apologizing for the Chinese communists. I yield back.
With many eyes on TikTok and ByteDance and the concerns about national security, earlier I spoke with Casey Fleming, CEO of Black Ops Partners Corporation, for analysis.
I already know his opinion.